You know, Sam, this country is going to the dogs. Used to be when you bought a politician, the son of a bitch stayed bought. Good evening, everyone. This is Stone Gasman, and tonight we are going to be doing an audio commentary for the 1980 Robert Zemeckis comedy Used Cars, starring Kurt Russell, Jack Warden, Deborah Harmon, Gerrit Graham, and some other familiar faces who I'm not going to give away right now. But this is a really fun ensemble for those of you who've never seen this movie before. But yeah, it came out in the summer of 1980. And the reason why it was kind of buried at the time was because it was going up against Airplane. So Airplane was the number one comedy of that year because of the Zucker Abraham Zucker trio of directors who came out of Kentucky Fried Theater. But so used cars, it really did not get discovered by people until like cable and especially on VHS. And but also because of its very hard R nature, I could see why not many more families went to go see Airplane at the time in 1980, whereas used cars kind of got forgotten. Even after Back to the Future came out. Remember, this was produced and written and directed by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, who later hit it big with Back to the Future in 1985. And this was actually kind of almost killed their careers because this came out after two quote unquote disasters that they had been involved in with Steven Spielberg. The first being I Want to Hold Your Hand, a very nice, sweet movie about Beatles mania set in 1963. Made for Universal, came out, didn't do any business whatsoever. And then you had 1941, which was the huge World War II comedy directed by Steven Spielberg that actually made money, but it was considered a failure because it was released by two different studios. So, and of course Spielberg, that was like his first big box office disappointment. Spielberg is actually the executive producer on this, along with John Milius, who actually sowed the seeds for used cars. But at any rate, just to let everybody know, we are paused at the beginning of the Columbia Pictures logo. And this had a very interesting small period in time when the Columbia Pictures logo actually went in on itself. And we don't see the Columbia lady for the entire time. I actually think it's a very unique logo. But anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. I think that we're. Shout out to everybody in the chat, including Cliff Booth. Awesome choice for a commentary. Haven't seen this one in forever. It's a perfect time to return to it because, like I said, before I press play, the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm dedicating it to President Jimmy Carter, who, of course, turns 100 years old on Tuesday. And, of course, there's a special sequence in this movie that features Jimmy Carter, and we also had one passing earlier today, so it'll be great to talk about him as well. But at any rate, let's go ahead and get started. I'm paused on the Columbia Pictures logo, and we will start on 3, 2, 1, and play. Now, as you can see, we go into the Columbia Pictures light right here. In the 70s, they kind of experimented with the logos and everything. I mean, I actually kind of like the worm logo for Warner Brothers, which, of course, is still prevalent on all their records and everything. But yeah, so Columbia Pictures, the reason why they released this movie is because they were the other studio, aside from Universal, that was involved in the release of 1941, the Spielberg movie, which Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale had wrote. And but also when they showed the script to Frank Price, apparently because he had sold cars for a living, he totally got it and he went on board with it. Thank goodness. I can imagine any other studio if the studio head didn't have that kind of experience, would they have been eager to go for this, considering the dark satiric nature that runs through the writing here. Now, here's the 4K of Used Cars, which was released by Shout Factory a couple of years ago. And I also have the Twilight Time Blu-ray, which of course had this awesome audio commentary with Zemeckis, Bob Gale, and Kurt Russell. And to this day, it's one of my top 3 favorite commentaries. I mean, I almost listen to it every time I watch Used Cars now. So I'm not, and I promise not to repeat everything from the commentary. I am going to mention certain things because as we move forward, I want to make this commentary my own. So, Used Cars, yeah, copyright 1980 by Columbia Pictures. So yeah, Kurt Russell. Now this was right after he did Elvis for John Carpenter, which was really, I mean, the first real adult role he had after those Disney pictures that he did, like Computer Wore Tennis Shoes and Strongest Man on Earth, that kind of thing. And Jack Warden as the Fuchs brothers. Yeah. Jack Warden kind of owns this film, considering he has a dual role as these rival used car brothers that own separate lots across the street in Arizona. Music by Patrick Williams, who had just been nominated for an Oscar. And you don't hear the song Used Cars until the very end, until the end credits. But it is actually a really fun song here. And so the origins of this, from what I understand, the genesis of all this actually came from executive producer John Milius. Now, John Milius had directed, movies in the 70s like The Wind and the Lion and Big Wednesday. He was a surfer. And of course, he had, there's his credit right there with Steven Spielberg, John Milius. And he also directed one of my favorite movies of all time, Conan the Barbarian. And he later did Red Dawn and some other films. And he was a surfer and everything. And he evidently had this reputation as a master storyteller. So he thought of this idea of, why don't we shoot a movie of used car salesmen outside of Las Vegas, so that when people drive there, and they want to go gamble, they sell their cars, and then of course they end up losing all their money, and they have to go back to the same used car dealership to get another car. So so that didn't work out, unfortunately. But they wanted to cast George Hamilton, where he has his arms extended out in a poster and say, "Would you buy a used car from this man?" Now, this is director Alfonso Arau, who later in 1994 got international attention for like Water for Chocolate, which is a great Mexican film. And then he also directed A Walk in the Clouds with Keanu Reeves. However, back then he had become buddies with Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. And he was in this film, and then he was also in Romancing the Stone, where he played the marijuana grower in Colombia when Kathleen Turner and Michael Douglas become stranded and they need a car to get out of town. Well, and he reads her romance novels to his weed growers on the weekends. And so he's a massive Joan Wilder fan, and he's hilarious in that movie as well. And he's also in Three Amigos, where he played the evil bandito of the town. And Chevy Chase and I think Steve Martin and Martin Short, all go out there to try to rescue him. He was in that as well. So, but yeah, so they wanted to do this Las Vegas story of a used car salesman, but Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale ended up writing a whole draft of the script and throwing it out. They spent some time on this. But the whole idea was that this is a Frank Capra movie where everybody lies. Every character is very, very dishonest. And in fact, when they originally tried to write the script, they tried to make it where every single line of dialogue is a lie. Now, they found out that they basically determined that was going to be almost impossible to do, but for the sake of structure and storytelling and everything. So, but yeah, this is a Frank Capra movie with dishonest people, essentially. And Kurt Russell. It's interesting. I've always liked the legendary story of Walt Disney himself. Right before he died, supposedly he wrote Kurt Russell's name on a piece of paper and knew that he was going to be huge. But I mean, look, he managed to get out of being a Disney child star, which unfortunately can't be said for others. He managed to do it and break away from that. And when he played Elvis, that completely changed his life, especially after he met director John Carpenter, and they would later work together on Escape to New York and The Thing and Big Trouble in Little China. Oh, hey, Scott, how you doing, sir? Time stamp, we are at 7 minutes and 15 seconds. Shoot to 7:15 right now, where he's fishing across the street, fishing the customer over from one used dealership to another. It's wonderful. Ouch. Now you got to remember, this was shot in 1980. This was long before the internet. This was long before cell phones, and this was also a period of time where apparently the fashion sense was these massive, huge leisure suits, which kind of dominate the the wardrobes here. But what I love about used cars, aside from the fact it's just, I think it's a great American satire on the culture, the political culture, and everything, and how people like used car salesmen, they get into politics and they get into corruption and everything, and they they do use all their charm and their dishonesty to get ahead in politics. And there's a lot of in the script, there's a lot of gem lines. We're coming up on one of them right now, where they really, really take a bash at politicians, the Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis. Where here's Jack Warden, who's the villain of the piece, where he said he's about to be fucked about the goddamn ramps coming through my lot. And of course, his lawyer, played here by the late Joe Flaherty. Flaherty passed away, I think, back in May or June of this year. And it's this specific line right here. I couldn't believe when I first heard it, where Roy is so corrupt. And he says right here, this country is going to the dogs. Used to be when you bought a politician, the son of a bitch stayed bought. And of course, Joe Flaherty's reaction is pitch perfect. Oh man, that was a perfectly good bumper sticker. So, and there's Gerrit Graham, who has who we'll talk about much later, but he had started out with Brian De Palma on a film called Phantom of the Paradise, which I plan on doing a commentary on it later. But during the featurettes on the Shout Factory Blu-ray of used cars, Bob Gale was talking about how Jack Warden was so believable in these two roles that when the sound people did it, they said, "Oh, Jack Warden is so great. His performance is so awesome." And the guy that looked like him, I don't know where you found him, but who plays Luke, the kind Luke Fuchs, who runs the Underdog used car lot across the way here, they had no idea. They had no idea that it was played by the same guy who, in fact, is Jack Warden. And initially, Warden had turned this movie down, I think because he had assumed that he was only offered the one role of Roy Fuchs. And then when he was said he could play both roles, he was offered again for both roles. He said yes. He actually had told Robert Zemeckis, there are three things every actor wants to do: play drunk, play dead, or play two roles in the same movie. And so he got to do two of those things with this. And you have to notice that everybody litters in this movie. This is something I'm not sure everybody notices. But yeah, all these characters are just so, so irresponsible and dishonest that they just they don't care. I mean, like I mean, whatever. I'm just trying to get ahead in my environment. I don't give a damn about the trash. Now, Toby, the little beagle dog right here is wonderful. One of my favorite dog performances in all films, where, um, of course, some of his big scenes come later, but here he has a great little introduction. I like the fact that the dog Toby has his own introduction, where he gets the wrong screwdriver. But even later, we discover that the dog is so smart, he actually lies along with these guys just to sell a vehicle. I mean, it's brilliant. Those are the 1,200 apiece cars. Even in 1980, yeah, would somebody really pay $1,200 for that? I mean, well, I mean, color TV sets were very expensive at the time, and we're going to see plenty of those later. So Jack Warden, he decides, he's going to go ahead and help Rudy Russo buy the state Senate seat. But as we find out, Rudy unfortunately has a bad heart, and this is going to come into play later, of course. So okay, so John Milius, the whole Las Vegas thing it didn't quite work out. But when Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, when they finally got the script together and they got the approval from the studio, they were going to shoot it in Arizona over the course of the winter months, which is actually a perfect time to shoot in Arizona, if you ask me. And let's just say the production was, I wouldn't go so far as to say it was reckless. But there were like people out of control, according to Robert Zemeckis. The people that were handling the money, the stunt people. Apparently, there was a lot of drugs and a lot of other crazy stuff happening, which they do touch on in the commentary. The commentary is actually not only hilarious just because of the fact you hear Kurt Russell laugh his ass off throughout the whole thing, and provide some awesome stories all his own. But that's what I'm saying is that, I mean, comedies rarely get this get this dark in terms of, okay, yeah, this is a comedy, and one brother is basically trying to push another brother to die, his own brother to die, just so he can inherit the lot, and because he's greedy and corrupt and all that stuff. So now, okay, now this actor right here, he's an actor named Michael Talbot. Now you might recognize him from First Blood, the Sylvester Stallone picture, where he plays one of the cops in the small town who are on the hunt for Rambo. And he's the one that when we find out that John Rambo is actually a Green Beret, Michael Talbot is actually there with the gun, and he probably looks at those magazines, so he knew that John Rambo was probably a real badass, and that we should probably just leave the guy alone. Well, Bob Gale on this commentary told a great story about him, and also the fact that Kurt Russell also mentioned that he was actually living with Brian Dennehy, who was of course in First Blood, who played the sheriff who was going after Rambo. Well, yeah, apparently they were roommates together, and Bob Gale tells the story on the commentary of Michael Talbot, how he would try to pick up girls in bars and everything, where he would basically just go up and say, okay, would you like, do you want to have sex now? Just like, just being so blunt about it. And like, they would keep telling him, like, you're never going to get a girl, boss, if you keep asking him like that. But he just kept on doing it. But see, I'm trying to remember what other movies I've seen him in, because I know I've seen his face in other films. He was in Carrie, the Stephen King movie with Sissy Spacek, where he played Freddy, and he was also in the John Milius movie Big Wednesday, which is about surfers, where he played Hog. And he was also in the Clint Eastwood movie Any Way, Which Way You Can, Mommy Dearest. He played a cowboy in National Lampoon's Vacation, but unfortunately was cut. And then he was also in Manhunter, the Hannibal the Cannibal movie from '86. And one of his last films was the 1992 film Hero with Dustin Hoffman, where he played a police officer. And he had done a lot of television, too. I mean, everything from Policewoman to MASH to Lou Grant to Eight is Enough. And he's still with us, but he's pretty much out of the biz. Yeah, has been for a while now. As of 2011, he's also a spokesperson presenter for Panteo Productions, a production company and a distributor of firearms and tactical videos. But he's the one that's being sent by Roy Fuchs to basically push Luke to death here by driving him around in this car, which apparently he had rebuilt from scratch, which makes it even worse. But yeah, they were talking a lot on the commentary about how a lot of the stuntmen were either on drugs and would drive these cars and in insane ways, and just it was. I mean, there was a lot of instances where somebody could have died on this thing. I mean, apparently the production was apparently that out of control at times, and it's. I mean, they got a rich plethora of stuntman stories when it comes to this. I mean, Terry Leonard, the most famous and the most powerful stuntman in Hollywood. He was actually also in John Milius's Conan the Barbarian, where he actually injured himself when he fell through the eye of the serpent's place where it's being held and everything. And he did some stunts on this where he. At one time he has to kick in a television set, but of course he actually insisted on being grounded. Because he was terrified about kicking the TV in when it was playing live. And here is, of course, Andrew Duncan, who is also in Slapshot. The Universal film with Paul Newman about the hockey team. If I remember correctly, he played like a newscaster in the beginning. I don't remember for sure, but yeah, he has one of the great lines in this from the script, which is basically $50 never killed anybody. And this is all set up so brilliantly by Galen Zemeckis. Yeah, the last thing you would have expected was somebody to come through that door having a heart attack right in front of you. $50 never killed anybody. And Jack Warden goes all out on this. They had nothing but the best things in the world about to say about Jack Warden, and certainly in terms of his performance here, because when we ultimately see him play dead, it's just it's awesome. It is really awesome. Now, you may not notice it. Of course, those who listen to the commentary, he actually grabs the cash out of the guy's hand. Damn. And of course, what's Gerrit Graham doing? Well, he's having sex with one of the customers in the back seat of one of the cars. I mean, I don't know if he succeeded in selling her the car, but Oh, and there goes Jack Warden right there. And this would probably be the perfect time to talk about Jack Warden for a bit, because he had a very, very interesting life, needless to say. He worked as a nightclub bouncer. He was also a professional boxer at one point of time, 13 bouts as a welterweight. And then he joined the United States Navy. In 1938, he was stationed for 3 years in China with the Yangtze Patrol. And he joined the Merchant Marine in 1941, but he quickly tired of the long convoy runs. And then in 1942, he went to the United States Army, where he served as a paratrooper in the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment with the 100th Air Force Airborne Division in World War II. And in 1944, on the eve of the D-Day invasion, in which many of his own friends died, Jack Warden, then a staff sergeant, shattered his leg when he landed in a tree during a nighttime practice jump in England. He spent almost 8 months in the hospital recuperating, during which time he read a Clifford Odets play and decided to become an actor at that point. Notably, Warden later portrayed a paratrooper from the 101st Rifles, the 82nd Airborne Division, in the movie That Kind of Woman from 1959, directed by the great Sidney Lumet. Yes. Jack Warden plays dead very, very, very well in this. Yes. And now some of his most famous film roles are actually from the 1950s. I mean, he started out with uncredited bits in The Asphalt Jungle and Sunset Boulevard in the year 1950, 5 years after the war had ended. And he also was in the Navy now and The Frogmen. And eventually he played Corporal Buckley in From Here to Eternity, which won Best Picture in 1953. And after that, he had played juror number 7 in the 1957 classic 12 Angry Men, also directed by Sidney Lumet. After that, he played Yeoman First Class Kraut Mueller in Run Silent, Run Deep with Clark Gable. The Sound and the Fury, based on the William Faulkner book. And also did movies like Donovan's Reef, The Thin Red Line from 1964, The Sporting Club, The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz with Richard Dreyfuss. And then he was nominated for an Academy Award for Hal Ashby's Shampoo in 1975. Then he played Harry M. Rosenfield in another genuine classic, which is All the President's Men. Then he was nominated for another Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for Heaven Can Wait, co-directed by Buck Henry and Warren Beatty, I believe. And after that, he was in The Champ and Justice for All, the Hal Ashby film Being There, where he played President Bobby of the United States, The Great Muppet Caper, and he was in this weird Ryan O'Neal comedy called So Fine. And I'm not kidding. This comedy, So Fine, from 1981, is about this guy who manages to sell some jeans with clear plastic inserts in the back. So they're see-through jeans. And evidently they become a hit. Only in 1981, though. And then after that, he was in The Verdict with Paul Newman, The Aviator with Christopher Reeve, September. He did a couple of Woody Allen films like September and Mighty Aphrodite and Bullets Over Broadway. He also did the Problem Child movies. He was in Toys. And then I remember him from While You Were Sleeping, the Sandra Bullock movie. And one of my favorites of his is actually one of his last, when he was in the Warren Beatty film Bulworth from 1998, where he played Eddie Davers, who helps Warren Beatty, who is a California senator, acquire a guy to off him as he's running for re-election. And so he decides to be as honest as possible. And of course, that means he becomes very, very popular. And it's a great political satire. It's one of the, I mean, even though it barely made its money back at the box office, I mean, that's a late Warren Beatty film that everybody needs to check out. Seriously. And Jack Warden's very last film was The Replacements, which was the Keanu Reeves picture in 2000. And then he passed away at the age of 85 in 2006. Now, that line, what are you, a fucking parrot? That was improvised because Jack Warden was evidently so upset at Gerrit Graham for repeating everything that Kurt Russell says just because he hated the fact that he had no lines in the scene. But here he has some lines. I mean, I don't know why he felt the need for that, just that one whole sequence where they're in the mud and everything, that he needed another line in there somewhere. But hey, we got a gem of an ad lib from Jack Warden because of that bit. So thank you, Gerrit Graham. And here is Michael McKean and David L. Lander, better known together as Lenny and Squiggy from Laverne and Shirley, which was one of the hottest comedy sitcoms of the time. I think it was a spinoff of Happy Days. And and so, yeah, Laverne played by Penny Marshall and Shirley played by Cindy Williams. They work in Milwaukee at, I think, a bottling plant. And Lenny and Squiggy, I believe, are their neighbors. I haven't seen Laverne and Shirley in a long time. So forgive me if I get any of that wrong. But yeah, I mean, they were highlights of the show. I mean, and very funny. And this is also the 1977 Penthouse Pet of the Year, known only as Cheryl Rickson. Mm-hmm. And Bob Gale was telling us his story of, being this 28-year-old film producer, and he actually picked up Cheryl Rickson at the airport and drove her to the stadium where they shot this. Yeah, I mean, you could see why. I mean, you could definitely see why. She's from Australia. She had also done a bit part in The Eyes of Laura Mars, which was a thriller written by John Carpenter. And and after this, she didn't do much after this, unfortunately. But in July of 1980, she kicked off New York Mayor Ed Koch's Festival of Fragrances, and she was again showcased with a 10 spread in Penthouse and posed for We magazine in November of '82. Rickson did not receive the Penthouse prizes that had been promised to her, and in 1985 took the magazine's publisher to the New York State Supreme Court, which ruled that she was entitled to them, and the judgment was later affirmed on appeal. Now, in this scene, you can actually see in Kurt Russell's hand are some dick nose glasses, so basically with glasses with dicks as the noses. But when the studio saw this, and apparently, according to Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis, that nobody had ever seen these things before. I mean, they were brand new at the time. But when the studio saw the dailies, they were so appalled that Frank Price actually called Bob Gale and said, "Reshoot this. You need to reshoot this. This is horrid." So they gave him the Groucho Marx glasses, but they didn't reshoot on the other side. So we still see the Mr. Dick Nose glasses on the other side. Now, also in this sequence, you have to look carefully. Blink twice and you might miss him. Is Dick Miller, the actor from Gremlins and other Joe Dante pictures. He was Dante's good luck charm and like everything from Piranha to Gremlins 2, Hollywood Boulevard, so many other films. He's in the scene in bed with a woman, an actress by the name of Rita Taggart. And they don't have any lines. They're right here. They're right here. Dick Miller and Rita Taggart are basically having sex in the scene while the commercial is playing during the football game. And Kurt Russell was saying that, he was talking about how, when he was married at the time, he was hanging out with Cheryl Rickson when his wife was 8 months pregnant. It's like, oh no, divorce is in the air. And and he actually said, when Dick Miller looks down at the woman he had just had sex with, I felt like this guy. It's terrific, yeah. Now, Jesus Palomino was a term that apparently John Milius had used. And by the way, John Milius is actually still with us, believe it or not. I know he had some health issues. Well, see, the thing is, he had written a script for a new Conan movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which very, very sadly and unfortunately, Universal didn't quite get on board with. But yeah, he is still with us. He is 80 years old. Obviously retired now, but he had served as the co-creator of the primetime Emmy award-winning television series Rome from 2005 to 2007. And he also wrote the first two Dirty Harry movies with Clint Eastwood, and he received an Academy Award nomination as the screenwriter of Apocalypse Now for director Francis Ford Coppola. Now, yeah, the way Kurt Russell just shifts from, one stereotype to another just to sell vehicles in this is hilarious. I remember when I started tweeting about used cars, I remember I got one response, I don't know who it was, said that, oh yeah, I was a used car salesman. This movie is very exaggerated, but it's very funny. And I just told them, oh, come on. We know you like to grab the customers and say, oh, just get in the motherfucking car. Now, I mean, there was a lot of language in this movie, I guess, for the time, although it's funny that, 7 years before this, Columbia Pictures had released The Last Detail, which is a legendary movie in terms of the story about how the studio was they didn't want to release it. They didn't want to distribute it because of the high amount of F-bombs in it. I mean, because it's about sailors who are doing a chicken shit detail, escorting a kleptomaniac seaman to a Marine Corps brig. And yes, they do what sailors do. They curse, They do what sailors do. And Columbia Pictures, it wasn't until actually it was shown at Cannes, and Jack Nicholson had won Best Actor, and they were finally shamed into releasing The Last Detail with every F-bomb intact. But yeah, they actually complained numerous times saying that there's just too much swearing in this movie. Now, this is the very famous and the wonderful Test Drive for Toby sequence. And, now the kid on the car back there who you just saw jump on top of the car was a kid that had some kind of condition where when he ate all this chocolate, he just started growing uncontrollable. He was very active, and he just started running away from the set, and they had to go grab him later. But he's only here for half the sequence. And the kids in the football uniforms, some of them are the stuntman's kids. So when we see them later, and they actually do some of these things, but it was very thought of on the spot, a lot of the gags that they do. But yeah, the Test Drive for Toby, where the dog actually pretends to be dead just to sell the car. Yeah, just put a rock in front of the tire. It's like, now give it a good put. Oh no! So Gerrit Graham's character in this is very, very superstitious. He can't drive any kind of red car. He's paranoid about driving cars with certain colors, primarily red. And so now, okay, yeah, and look at the tongue hanging out there. But Look, yeah, this is how you sell cars in America. Is when the dog is lying along with the used car salesman. How about I just buy the car? And I love the passport Scotch advertisement in the back. It just makes it all the more better. The spirit of success. Yes. Yeah, they actually did this. They actually had the stuntman's kids do that. I mean, they get away with a lot of stuff they wouldn't have gotten away with in like Los Angeles if they had shot this. But why don't we talk about Joe Flaherty a bit here? Because, like I said, he just passed away. Huge loss, and you probably recognize him from many other stuff. I mean, primarily Happy Gilmore, the Adam Sandler movie where he plays the heckler. You jackass! He's actually one of the best things about Happy Gilmore. Now that I remember, he also had a role on Freaks and Geeks. And he was with this Canadian sketch comedy show from 1976 to 1984 called SCTV, Second City Television, which apparently Deborah Harmon was also on as well, although she has not graced us with her presence yet. She is coming. You can't fool honest people. That commercial was a fluke. But see. Joe Flaherty was born in Pittsburgh, the eldest of 7 children. His father was a production clerk at Westinghouse Electric and of Irish heritage, and his mother was of Italian descent. Flaherty had actually served in the United States Air Force for 4 years before becoming involved in dramatic theater. So I'm sure that Flaherty and Jack Warden got along very, very well while making this film with plenty of stories to share with each other after serving in the military. Now, before I continue with Joe Flaherty, it must be noted that the lady with the bunny ears, that's Betty Thomas, who later became a director herself. She later directed the Brady Bunch movie, which was a huge hit for Paramount Pictures. And it's actually very funny. And she also did Private Parts, which is the Howard Stern biopic, and then also the Eddie Murphy version of Dr. Dolittle, which I can definitely say I have never, ever seen. And she actually is pretty much retired now, although the last 2 films that she did were actually pretty big hits, even if they were pretty critically reviled. John Tucker Must Die in 2006. And Alvin and the Chipmunks, The Squeakle in 2009. But according to Kurt Russell and Bob Gale, she wanted to take her clothes off in the scene. She was actually the script girl. And of course, we have these other strippers here. It's like, oh yeah. I love the cars here. I love the cars when they start banging into each other. Yeah, the camel just unfortunately didn't work out this time, Roy. Sorry. Just signed right here. And the news outlet is called KFUK. So, yeah. It's just and Betty Thomas had also directed the Sandra Bullock vehicle 28 Days. She was also an executive producer on Charlie's Angels and the remake of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Bernie Mac. But yeah, and she had an acting role on Hill Street Blues in the 80s, if I'm not. Yes, she won an Emmy for Sergeant Lucy Bates on the television series Hill Street Blues from the 1980s. And as of March 2018, Thomas is one of just 2 directors and the only solo director to have multiple films on the list of 17 highest U.S. grossing female directed films. So yeah, credit where credit is due. Now, as you can see, Rudy Russo is very, very high political ambitions. Too fucking high political ambitions. He wants to become the president. And so, naturally, a lot of comparisons were made to Bill Clinton. by the filmmakers, I think, during the commentary. And I love this bit right here that Kurt always points out, where, he comes on, he turns on the light, and there's Elvis. Kurt Russell would play Elvis again, if I remember correctly, in the Kevin Costner movie 3,000 Miles to Graceland. It's amazing, just real quick about Elvis in general. I saw both of the films that came out in the past 2 years, the Austin Butler biopic directed by Baz Luhrmann, and I did not like it at all. I felt that it failed to capture the mystique of the king, but it also failed to criticize his character in any way. I mean, his hardcore drug use of all those attacks that he did near the end of his life, his womanizing, his violent temper. It never addressed any of those things. And then you had the A24 movie Priscilla, which did touch upon those things and actually showed, unlike the Baz Luhrmann movie, the dark side of Elvis. And I got to confess, I've never seen the John Carpenter, Kurt Russell version of Elvis. I mean, I know it was very, very popular when it was shown in '79, but then again, this was only a few years after Elvis had passed away. Now, here is where they're talking about, can we hijack the presidential address? And according to Lenny and Squiggy, you can. According to Lenny and Squiggy, you can do this. But, and Bob Gale told the story many times. He told it on the commentary and the featurette about how when he got all this information about whether you could do this or not. And you got to remember, this was back when there was only 3 channels in PBS. They actually drop the 700 Club. I mean, yeah, who the hell remembers the 700 Club on that? And they also mentioned a store that no longer exists called Radio Shack. Oh, that brings up some memories for sure. We're fucking with the president of the United States. Well, he fucks with us, doesn't he? I mean, this was all the stuff that Steven Spielberg did not like. He did not like all this dialogue regarding the president. That's another ad lib on the part of Frank McRae, who I can't believe I haven't mentioned Frank McRae yet, but I knocked those motherfuckers on the ass too. Let's see. Yeah, Frank McRae was a professional football player, actually. He graduated from Tennessee State University with a double major in drama and history, and he was a defensive tackle for the Chicago Bears in the 1967 NFL season, appearing in 6 games. Among his acting roles are bank robber Reed Youngblood in the movie Dillinger, which was actually written and directed by John Milius. He was a police captain in 48 Hours. Last Action Hero, Loaded Weapon 1. He was in Red Dawn, also directed by Milius, of course. He was Sharky in the James Bond film License to Kill, which I particularly love that one. And also a professional boxing champion, Harry Noble, in Batteries Not Included. And he also appeared in 4 Sylvester Stallone films: Fist, Paradise Alley, Rocky II, and Lockup, as well as a protective trucker in the 1989 film The Wizard. And he made an effective pairing with John Candy as 2 bumbling subordinates versus tank soldiers under an equally bumbling Sergeant Frank Tree, played by Dan Aykroyd in 1941, and later as a Wally World security guard in National Lampoon's Vacation. He further showed his comedic abilities as Jim the Clumsy Mechanic in Used Cars, and his last role was Cookie in the Hallmark Channel original film Love's Long Journey and Love's Abiding Joy. And Frank McRae, he also had roles in Shaft in Africa, Walking Tall Part 2, Norma Ray, with Sally Field, where she won the Oscar for Best Actress. Cannery Row, Lightning Jack. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. But yeah, Frank McRae passed away at the age of 80 years old in April of 2021. So yeah, we lost him during the pandemic. Now here is Deborah Harmon. Now, Back to the Future fans will know who Deborah Harmon is because she is the very first person that we see in the Back to the Future trilogy on a television set, where she mentions that plutonium had been stolen and reporting it on the news. It's a very, very brief, very unbilled cameo. But yeah, she is in that. That's how she obviously got the part. But when I looked over her filmography, I was stunned to discover that she really hasn't done any other films aside from Bachelor Party, the one with Tom Hanks from 1984 and Back to the Future. She hasn't done anything else aside from television. But she was on Laverne and Shirley. She played a receptionist. She was in Quincy M.E., MASH, Facts of Life, Night Court, The Twilight Zone, Prince of Bel-Air, St. Elsewhere, Just the 10 of Us, Growing Pains, Boy Meets World, Married with Children, Clueless. And one of her last roles was in Malcolm in the Middle from the early 2000s. And she hasn't done much else from that. But I do love her in this movie. I think that she is very, very funny and also very, very sexy, of course. And yeah, and I do like her as the love interest in this movie. If that's Luke's daughter, we got to get rid of her. Yeah. I mean, what if she figures out what's good? But of course, Frank McRae has the perfect solution. Just throw her in the hole out back with her old man. Yeah, just forget out about it. Just throw her away. So now they're going to a bowling alley where I mean, this is they showcase this sequence on the Shout Factory Blu-ray and 4K and the Bob Gale featurettes as being a perfect example of how, the sound and the dialogue and how Kurt Russell was able to make this work in terms of actually telling her that he likes her, that she's just not another, girl that he wants to sleep with and everything. Of course, with Gerrit Graham's character, we see him with a girl all the time. He's always cruising with somebody. Well, at least you're very honest about your dishonesty. Yes, I love that line as well. Yeah. So yeah, Deborah Harmon unfortunately just hasn't done much outside of these two films for Gale and Zemeckis. I don't even remember who she plays in Bachelor Party, to be perfectly honest. But now, like I said, all throughout the 70s, I mean, the films that Russell made were basically Disney films, like the Computer Wore Tennis Shoes and the Barefoot Executive. Now You See Him, Now You Don't, Super Dad, films like that, which aren't really remembered that much today, to be perfectly honest. And then, after he did Elvis, this was basically his first adult role that was theatrically released. Although I think Elvis might have gotten theatrically released overseas, maybe. He was nominated for an Emmy Award for Elvis, and then he was married to this actress named Susan Hubley, who actually played Priscilla at the time. And he actually mentioned Susan Hubley on the commentary as well. She was also in a movie called Hardcore with George C. Scott, but I'll always remember her from a TV movie she did with Cliff Robertson called The Key to Rebecca, which I'm probably the only one in the universe that actually remembers that, from 1985 for television. But yeah, this was right before he made Escape from New York, when he became known as Snake Plissken, and then, of course, he did The Thing, which is I just saw The Thing again not too not too long ago in Alamo Drafthouse. Saw it in the theater for the first time. Plays awesomely, and recently I also caught him in another film he did in the '80s, which I'd never seen before, called The Best of Times, which is a football comedy with Robin Williams, where they both play these small town guys that they went to high school together, and they played on the same football team. And Robin Williams literally dropped the ball, which resulted in a tie between them and a rival school. So, like 16 years later, they decide to try and try to redo it. Hopefully, this time with Robin Williams not dropping the ball. And Kurt Russell is really the MVP of that movie. See, there's Gerrit with a girl right there. Yeah, so he's going to give her a bus ticket to go to Florida because that's where he lied and said that her father went. In fact, yeah, he said the same lie to both Roy and of course Luke's daughter. I took her to a bowling alley, for Christ's sake. Yeah, exactly. What would a senator do? What would a senator do? Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So now we come to the centerpiece of used cars, and this is not only my favorite sequence, but I also think it's one of the funniest sequences in the history of cinema. And I don't. That is not an exaggeration. It's really weird. When I first saw this movie as a teenager, it didn't quite click for me. I found some parts of it funny, but it didn't quite click for me. And it was only until I did a bit more, reading about history and and also when I saw it again in England. I actually saw it on the Sky Network of all things. I fell in love with it immediately and understood exactly what Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale were doing with the political satire. Now, this, of course, was made when Jimmy Carter was president, the peanut farmer from Georgia that served as the president from 1976 to 1980. And, I'm fairly apolitical. I rarely ever talk about politics unless it's unless I'm talking about a political movie. Like if it's The Candidate or Bulworth or something like that, I'll go into detail on how I feel. But I'm generally a very apolitical person. That being said, I do believe that Jimmy Carter was one of our last decent presidents, if not our last decent president. Now, of course, his term is kind of infamous because, he kind of lost in a landslide to Ronald Reagan in 1980. I think partially due to the October surprise, which you all can go ahead and look up yourselves. But here's where we actually decide to hijack the presidential address. So while Jimmy Carter is going to be doing this nationwide address, remember, only 3 channels at the time, as well as PBS. There was no cable, really. Cable was in its infancy. And we had no physical media, practically. And we certainly had no internet. So that's what I'm saying. Everybody was watching the presidential address on 3 channels. I think that's the Newlywed Game that they're showing footage of. And yeah, he has a gun, a shotgun, right in front of David L. Lander's face right here, which makes it all the more hilarious. Now, if you look closely, you can actually see it was raining during this entire time, which, yeah, they actually do still shoot in the rain. And I've noticed more often than not that the rain does tend to get obscured by just how it was shot, and everything. Like, I know there was a scene in Gremlins where it's actually raining, even though it could be snowing just as well. Yeah, they actually wrote into the script that somebody brings a miniature television set to this classy restaurant just so they could watch the presidential address. Yeah, all Rudy Russo had to do was keep her away from a television set. I respect my ass, food giant. I just can't escape the television with Jimmy Carter on it. Now, I was born in April of '79, and that's when Carter was in office. And of course, later on he would win a Peace Prize, and he would build all these homes well into his 90s with his wife, who passed away just last year. And on Tuesday, Jimmy Carter is going to turn 100 years old. Yeah, I know we're still like 28 hours away. We're still like 28 hours away, but I don't care. He is going to turn 100 years old on Tuesday. But anyway, you're looking for the solution for inflation. So this commercial is, here again, it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen in a movie. And Gerrit Graham really does sell the Marshall Lucky character. Now that's a stunt man actually shooting the gun, but that's real bullets. That's real bullets they're shooting with the gun. And, Roy Fuchs is just watching all this from his house while they share what is probably the longest kiss in motion picture history at the same time. This is just all just gold, comedy gold. Look out, Marshall Lucky, it's high prices. You dirty old high prices. Frank McRae sells this so well. It's like oh my God. Yes, sir. So remember, friends, that's New Deal used cars. Apparently, Deborah Harmon is really falling for this kiss all the way, so might as well let it roll, right? Yep, we blew the shit out of that overpriced motherfucker. Just the way we blow the shit out of all high prices. And like I said, I can't think of a better tip of the hat to Jimmy Carter right here. I have heard you with unmistakable clarity. Now, look, I know it's not going to happen. I just hope that in response to all his birthday wishes on Tuesday, he will say, I have heard you with unmistakable clarity. Man, that would be so awesome. But here's my question. And look, if I ever managed to meet Robert Zemeckis or Bob Gale in person, this is the question I would ask him. If I only had the chance to ask one. Did Jimmy Carter ever find out about this? I cannot believe that nobody ever told him. I gotta believe that somewhere along the way somebody told him about this or actually showed him the movie. I'm pretty sure if he ever found out that he found out many, many years ago, and he's long since forgotten. But I honestly do wonder if he ever saw this, and if he did, what his reaction would be. Of course, there's that very famous presidential reaction by Ronald Reagan when he was watching Back to the Future, and when Doc Brown asked Marty, who's president of the United States in 1985? And of course he says Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, the actor? Well, who's vice president? Jerry Lewis? Ronald Reagan, I'm sure it happened, but he asked the projectionist to rewatch the scene because he found it's just so funny. But I do believe that. I honestly do believe it. And he also quotes Back to the Future in his, second term speech, his second term that he used to his speech to kick off the second term, where he said, where we're going, We don't need roads, which of course is the final line from Back to the Future. And it's amazing because Back to the Future is, of course, now a script used in film schools and urged to study by prospective screenwriters. You know, it's considered one of the great scripts in film history. It was nominated for an Academy Award, which was well deserved. Unfortunately, Back to the Future only got one Oscar for, I think it was sound effects editing, and Priceless Love was the Power of Love was nominated for Best Original Song. But of course, I mean, and Back to the Future Part 2 and Part 3 did not have any luck at the Oscars either. But Robert Zemeckis finally got critical and commercial recognition with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which of course was in between Back to the Future 1 and 2. And then he did Death Becomes Her, which won the Academy Award for its visual effects. I love that movie. It's a black comedy as well. I always love the fight in this fight sequence, the setup and the payoff with the chair, and how, you know, he banged the top of the ceiling. You know, he had to look this time to actually make sure that he didn't hit it. But yeah, that entire fight was done by stuntmen, and they would shoot the close-ups of the actor later, and it's seamless. It's very, very seamless. And that, of course, is Luke's daughter and Luke himself. And that's when Roy figures out exactly where his brother is buried. But I mean, Robert Zemeckis has always been a all-time favorite director. And, you know, he and Bob Gale wrote and directed and produced these three American masterpieces, I think. I Want to Hold Your Hand, Used Cars, and Back to the Future. I mean, they are, I think, just as good as all Frank Capra's movies. But the truth of the matter is only one of those three is ever really celebrated by the public and by pop culture, and that, of course, is Back to the Future, and it will always be. Used Cars, no, completely different. What happened with Used Cars is very interesting in that they had a sneak preview of it in Dallas, Texas, and the audience went crazy for the movie. In fact, according to Bob Gale himself, the test audience scores were the highest in the studio's history, either the highest or the second highest in Columbia Pictures history. So they thought they had like a Smokey and the Bandit hit on their hands here, which this is not exactly Smokey and the Bandit. It's a little bit more sharper and satiric than Smokey and the Bandit, which I've always liked what Leonard Maltin said about Smokey and the Bandit, which is, you know, about as subtle as the Three Stooges, but it's a classic compared to all the films that it spawned later, including the sequels. And Leonard Maltin was also a champion of used cars when the movie came out originally in 1980. There was some good critical notices, but unfortunately what happened was Columbia got too impatient, and they decided to bump up the release date from August to July, and they released it right after Airplane, which is the Abrahams Zucker comedy classic, you know, that made a shit ton of money at the box office. Used Cars barely got its budget back, to be perfectly honest. It was pretty much a flop all the way. And it's a combination of where the studio screwed up with the release date and not having an advertising campaign. But also, I mean, and like I said, Kurt Russell also felt that this was a very, very difficult movie to promote to an audience. But it was only released in half the country. And then when it bombed in one half of the country, the other half didn't even want to watch the movie. They didn't even want it. So this film died an early death that wasn't deserved but it's now considered a cult comedy. Largely thanks to Back to the Future, and of course now with people discovering I Want to Hold Your Hand and Use Cars now. Yeah, these guys, they were on to something. Definitely, they were definitely on to something in the late 70s, early 80s. Do you think we want to be associated with the President of the United States? We run an honest lot here. Hmm. But I still find it shocking that Kurt Russell has never really been, aside from winning a Golden Globe or nominated for a Golden Globe for the 1983 film Silkwood, he's always found it difficulty getting awards. I mean, I know that when he did Miracle, he actually went back to the Disney studio and he did this hockey movie called Miracle. I wanted him to get a Best Actor nomination, but he was completely ignored. Very, very sadly. Oh, yeah. He just wants to get some breakfast. He'll be right back. Now, we haven't really talked about Gerrit Graham yet. I should go ahead, and he's going to have some. He's going to have some good moments here coming up. Coming up here in a few. But he's best known for his appearances in Brian De Palma films, as well as 2 Star Trek series. Let's see. So yeah, he started out with Brian De Palma in his comedy films Greetings and Hi Mom, which were also black comedies. He was in the sequel to The Blob called Beware of the Blob, which was touted as the film that JR shot because it was directed by Larry Hagman. And but this was 10 years before Dallas, and when they re-released the movie, that's what they did. So yeah. But anyway, Gerrit Graham, he was also in Pretty Baby, the Brooke Shields movie, Demon Seed, National Lampoon's Class Reunion, The Man with One Red Shoe with Tom Hanks, Terror Vision, Chopping Mall, some real cult films here. And he was also in Police Academy 6, City Under Siege, Chud 2, Bud the Chud. And he was also in My Girl 2 and Child's Play 2. Now, Child's Play 2, I think it's awesome that in this movie, Used Cars, he's paranoid about driving a red car. And then in Child's Play 2, he actually drives a red car. And of course, he gets murdered by Chucky. So, but he hasn't been in a movie since 2012 when he played a hitchhiker in something called Cove Road. But Gerrit is definitely still with us. He's 74 now. Turned 75 on November 27th. But the one film that I'm looking forward to watching and doing a commentary on around Halloween is Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise, which Gerrit Graham is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the leads in it. He plays a character named Beef. So I'm definitely looking forward to Phantom of the Paradise. Yeah. Yeah, Roy L. Fuchs thinks he has so much power, even over the cops. He was already dead. I love the advertisement for the drive-in in the back. I mean, like, drive-ins just don't exist anymore. I mean, this entire area is, of course, now completely different. I haven't lived in Phoenix, but I've been there before. I actually tried to find the used car dealership in this movie, and I couldn't find it, unfortunately. There's Joe Flaherty there, just standing around watching. Oh, so yeah, the 4 now got to go, including Toby. Yeah. And he can't even sell a crummy-looking bike to some kids now. There was a 9th grader looking at it yesterday. Now, on the commentary, they actually joked during the scene that they have no idea what Frank McRae here is actually cooking on the grill. He's barbecuing something over there. We can't tell what it is, though. And here again, this clever bit about, the number 10 and the gamble and all that stuff, because that's what's going to come into play later. Yeah, he's a superstitious car dealer that likes to gamble on sports games. Now, I mean, it's, he says that the numbers added up to 10. It's impossible. There's not any phone combination of 7 numbers that can add up to 10. It's just, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess they would have to be all 1s and then a 2, I guess. So, yeah, the phone number he dialed, it just had all 1s and all 2s, I guess. Whatever. All right, so let's go back. I wanted to talk a bit more about Joe Flaherty because, like I said, we just lost him earlier in the year. See, SCTV had ceased production in 1984. He and Deborah Harmon were on that. He played Count Floyd in a short film that was shown at concerts by the rock band Rush before the song The Weapon for their tour in support of Grace Under Pressure. In 1988, Flaherty reprised his Count Floyd character for live-action segments of the animated series The Completely Mental Misadventures of Ed Grimley, a character created and voiced by another SCTV alum, Martin Short. He appeared in a number of cult favorite movies, including an appearance as a Western Union postal worker who delivers Doc Brown's 70-year-old letter to Marty McFly, in Back to the Future Part 2, as well as the crazed fan yelling jackass who secretly works for antagonist Shooter McGavin in Happy Gilmore. In season 8 of Family Guy, Flaherty once again played the Western Union Man in Something, Something, Something Dark Side. In 1989, he played a guest role on Married with Children in a season 4 episode as a dentist in the episode called Tooth or Consequences, where he has to repair Al Bundy's teeth. And he was also on Police Academy, the series, appeared in various Disney shows and films, including The Legend of Tarzan and Home on the Range. And beginning in 2004, he was an artist in residence at Humber College's School of Creative and Performing Arts in Toronto, where he taught a comedy writing course. He previously helped found the school's comedy writing and performance program, serving as its artistic director. He was also on the program's advisory committee. Flaherty impersonated a number of celebrities, including Kirk Douglas, Richard Nixon, Gregory Peck, Alan Alda, Bing Crosby, Gavin MacLeod, and Elvis Presley. Flaherty appeared in a cameo in the deleted scenes from Anchorman as the manager of a Texas television station and the boss of Veronica Corningstone, played by Christina Applegate, one of the members of the station news' team. He also appeared as an immigration Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer in the Canadian Road Trip episode of That 70s Show, along fellow SCTV member Dave Thomas. And in the 3rd episode of Freaks and Geeks, Tricks or Treats, he is dressed up as a vampire, a reference to his character of Count Floyd. Now, he was also in 1941 as both Sal Stewart and Raoul Lipschitz. And then he played a border guard in Stripes near the end in the 3rd act. He provided a voice in Heavy Metal, the animated film. He was in Johnny Dangerously as a death row inmate. Sid Sleaze in Sesame Street Presents Follow That Bird. Club Paradise, One Crazy Summer. Inner Space, Blue Monkey, Who's Harry Crumb. Stewart Saves His Family. And the last movie he did was he voiced a beaver in Phil the Alien. So yeah, that's the late Joe Flaherty. The late Joe Flaherty. Mm-hmm. Now, the I think that the I forget who plays. Oh man, I forget who plays the driving safety instructor right here. I'd have to look somewhere else. But this is an actual football game where they actually spliced together to make it work in this scene. And they said they used it on equipment that had been brand new at the time. Like they had never done this before, where they were actually to make it seamless with the game playing in the background on the television set. This was all brand new technology for them in 1980. Woodrow Parfrey plays Mr. Gertner, I think was his name. And he passed away at 61, only 5 years after Used Cars. He was also in the Outlaw Yosie Wales. Yeah, I know. Inner Space. The Sting 2. He did an episode of The Fall Guy. He was in Francis with Jessica Lange. The Seduction with Morgan Fairchild. Yeah, he did a few other things, but I know him mainly from Used Cars. And we still haven't seen everybody yet. Just to give everybody a timestamp, we are at 1 hour and 18 minutes. 1 hour and 18 minutes, and we got approximately 35 minutes left to go in Used Cars. Hope you're all having a good evening. So yeah, we're going to see some familiar faces in the third act of this movie when it gets when it gets kicked off here. We don't see Lenny and Squiggy, unfortunately. They don't come back in this movie after they. Well, who knows what happened to them after they hijacked the the presidential address? Yeah, who knows what happened to them? But Michael McKean, of course, is still with us. He's 76 now. His birthday is coming up in October. I also love him from films like Clue and Laverne and Shirley, obviously. But he was also in 1941 as well. Jumpin' Jack Flash, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Short Circuit 2, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, Airheads. He was in the Brady Bunch movie. He played Mr. Larry Dittmeyer, the neighbor who was the antagonist to the Bradys in the Brady Bunch movie. And Teaching Mrs. Tingle, Mystery Alaska, Little Nicky, the Adam Sandler movie, the 2005 remake of The Producers. And, of course, This Is Spinal Tap and all the Rob Reiner, Christopher Guest movies like A Mighty Wind. He's in all those as well. But, yeah, this and Clue are my favorite Michael McKean performances, definitely. I'm going to go home and sleep with my wife after you pretended to be gay the entire time. Now, we're about to see here who's going to be driving Kurt Russell is going to be Dub Taylor. Now, Dub Taylor was a character actor from the 1940s to the 90s. He's the father of actor and painter Buck Taylor. But he's from vaudeville, made his film debut in 1938 as the cheerful ex-football captain Ed Carmichael in Frank Capra's You Can't Take It With You. So, of course, this movie being inspired by Frank Capra movies, they managed to have an actor who was in a Frank Capra movie, and that was Dub Taylor right here. He secured the part because the role required an actor who could play tuned percussion. During the 1950s and early 60s, he used his xylophone skills on several television shows, including the syndicated series Ranch Party. In 1939, he appeared in the film Taming of the West, where he originated the character of Cannonball, a role he played for the next 10 years in over 50 films. Cannonball was a comedic sidekick to Wild Bill Elliott in 13 features, and he played the character in other westerns starring Charles Starrett, Russell Hayden, Tex Ritter, and Jimmy Wakely. Taylor later dropped the Cannonball name because he felt it held him back from roles in films with larger budgets. He had bit parts in a number of classic motion pictures, including Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the 1954 version of A Star is Born, as well as Them, the Ant movie from the 50s. Also, he was in Dragnet, where he played a gangster called Miller Starkey, who was killed in the opening scene. He had a small role in the 1958 Walt Disney film Tonka as a rustler of stray horses for sale. And he was also in No Time for Sergeants, Major Dundee, the Sam Peckinpah movie, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, and Bonnie and Clyde from 1967. And he also played one of the guys in the saloon in Back to the Future Part 3. Now, one of my favorite stories on the commentary is when they found the guy who's asleep in the other table. They actually found him in the unemployment line in Arizona, and they picked him out, and he nails the part completely, just sleeping at the other side of the other side of the courtroom, representing poor old Deborah Harmon. So. In 1957, Dub Taylor was cast alongside Alan Hale Jr. in the syndicated Casey Jones TV series. He was in The Andy Griffith Show, first as the preacher who marries Charles Darling to Dud Walsh, then as Postmaster Talbert, and next as the brother-in-law of town handyman Emmett Clark. And he died in 1994. Now, here we have, yes, that is, in fact, Grandpa Munster in the role of the judge here. Al Lewis, yes, the legendary Al Lewis, who was born in 1923 and passed in 2006. He was on the Munsters, and then he was in the show Car 54, Where Are You? Later, he was a restaurant owner, he was a political candidate, and a radio broadcaster. Excuse me. In a 1998 interview with Walt Shepard, Al Lewis said, "My mother was a worker, worked in the garment trades. My mother was an indomitable spirit. My grandfather had no sons. He had 6 daughters. They've lived in Poland or Russia. Every 5 years it would change. My mother being the oldest daughter, they saved their money, and when she was about 16, they sent her to the United States, not knowing a word of English. She went to work in the garment center, worked her back and rear end off, and brought over to the United States her 5 sisters and 2 parents. I remember going on picket lines with my mother, and my mother wouldn't back down to anyone." In 1949, after a suggestion from a friend, he decided to pursue a career as an actor after joining the Paul Mann Actors Workshop in New York. And he worked in burlesque and vaudeville, then on Broadway in the dramas Night Circus and One More River, and as the character Mo Starker in the musical comedy Do Re Mi. His earliest television work includes appearances on the crime drama Decoy and the Phil Silver Show. From 1959 to 1963, appeared in 4 episodes of Naked City, and his first well-known television role was as Officer Leo Schnauzer on Car 54, Where Are You? He also played the part of Zalto the Magician in the Lost in Space episode Rocket to Earth. His first role in a movie was as Machine Gun Manny in Pretty Boy Floyd in 1960. And he also had small roles in The World of Henry Orient, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And They Might Be Giants. He appeared as the hanging judge in Used Cars, played a security guard on an episode of Taxi, and had a minor role in Married to the Mob. His last film role was in 2002, and it was called Night Terror. He was a recurring guest on the Howard Stern Show. He was a proponent of free speech, frequently spoke out in the late 1980s and early 1990s against government entities such as the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and non-government entities such as the PMRC, Parents Music Resource Center. Lewis famously uttered the phrase, "Fuck the FCC," during a speech at a Manhattan rally organized by radio personality Howard Stern. Stern later used Lewis's speech as the opening track of Stern's Crucified by the FCC comedy album in early 1991. So it's interesting that the script girl in this movie, Betty Thomas, would later direct the the Howard Stern biopic of Private Parts. Al Lewis also appeared in an episode of The American Experience, where he recalled his experiences at Coney Island, which he frequently visited and worked as a game barker. He was featured in the Atari 7800 video game Midnight Mutants, an action-adventure title with a Halloween theme. His appearance in the game mirrored his grandpa persona in The Munsters. In 1987, he opened an Italian restaurant named Grandpa's Bella Gente at 252 Bleecker Street in Manhattan. And in September of 89, he licensed a comedy club named Grandpa's to an entrepreneurial mafia family named Cataldo in New Dorp Plaza in Staten Island. Yes, entrepreneurial mafia family. Yeah. As a left-wing activist, he hosted a politically oriented radio program on WBAI and ran as Green Party candidate for the governor of New York in 1998. In that race, he sought to be listed on the ballot as Grandpa Al Lewis, arguing that he was most widely known by that name. But his request was rejected by the Board of Elections, a decision upheld in court against his challenge. Despite the setback, he achieved one of his campaign objectives. His total of 52,533 votes exceeded the threshold of votes set by New York law, and hence the guarantee the Green Party of New York an automatic ballot line for the next 4 years. He said that with no political machine and no money backing him, the likelihood of winning the governorship would be like, quote, climbing Mount Everest barefooted. In 2000, he sought the Green Party nomination for the U.S. Senate. He ultimately placed second in the primary with about 32% of the vote, losing to Mark Dunal. This bitch ain't loco. I'll win the damn thing on a default. Yeah. Yeah. So, Grandpa Al Lewis, he passed away in 2006 at the age of 82. And we just saw Alfonso Arau again. We're going to see him again soon. But now it's time for some more Back to the Future alumni. Because now we're about to see Mark McClure, who played Jimmy Olsen in the Superman films, and who later played Marty McFly's brother in the trilogy. And then we will also see Marty McFly's sister, Miss Wendy Jo Sperber, who was also in. There's Mark McClure right there, and there's Miss Wendy Jo Sperber, who was the star of I Want to Hold Your Hand. Well, technically Nancy Allen, who was starred in a lot of Brian De Palma films. She was actually the build star of I Want to Hold Your Hand, but Wendy Jo Sperber definitely Yeah, and they said that basically they just went out to all the local colleges and they said, "Hey, you want to be in a movie? Bring your own car." And of course, what's hilarious is that when they all showed up, all these kids, they were like, "Oh no, this is not my car. This is my brother's car." You know, like they made up any excuse in the book. So a lot of them probably lied just to get out to the shoot. But it goes along with the movie, you know. It's wonderful. And how can you not love that flimsy little top that Deborah Harmon is made to wear all throughout this thing? But yeah, this is when it becomes Red River and Ben-Hur with all of these cars which of course they call a mile of cars. Very, but this is the chariots from Ben-Hur. And you're about to watch some insane stunts here. There goes Alfonso Arau scratching his balls again. Yeah, check out. I always love Romance in the Stone. I love his when he puts that gun in Michael Douglas's face. It says "Vio con Dios, gringo." It's wonderful. But Alfonso Arau is still with us. He's going to turn 93 years old on January 11th. And he is a 5-time Ariel Award winner, including Best Director for Like Water for Chocolate, which was, of course, a BAFTA nominee. Yeah, so his character in this film is Manuel, and his character's name in Romance in the Stone was Juan. And in Three Amigos, he was El Guapo, based off of Sam Peckinpah, if I'm not mistaken there. His last film was actually the animated film Coco, where he contributed a voice to that. That was the Pixar film, which came out in 2017. I never saw that one. There's Mark McClure again. I mean, we barely see him in the, Wendy Jo Sperber actually has some funny lines here. Like, what are you supposed to do if a guy is standing on the roof of your car? All these kids are so paranoid about the driving test. Put that pedal to the floor. Yeah, this is pretty much all shot. This all happened live when they were shooting. Like, somebody could have seriously gotten hurt during this thing. Luckily, there weren't no serious accidents. Dude ain't no driving teacher. He's a con man. He's going to kill our black ass. Like, they're so paranoid about the fines and, getting in trouble. But see, that's the thing. According to Gale and Bob Zemeckis on that, a lot of these kids were just, they thought of any excuse to bring a car just to do this. And they had a lot of kids bring cars. I think they were surprised at the turnout. Oh, shit. Wait a minute. At the scene of an accident, always wait for the police to arrive. They're here. God. Rudy, we just lost our 1-car safety margin, pal. Yep, can't take any more chances. Just can't do it. Let's see. Oh, yeah, Mark McClure actually has a character name here, Heavy Duty Dubois. He's never really addressed in the movie, though. The film was shot in 29 days at the working Darner Chrysler Plymouth dealership in Mesa, Arizona from October to November of 1979. The dealership served as the setting for Royal Fuchs's pre-owned automobiles, while a vacant lot across the street served as the setting for New Deal used cars. The vacant lot now is an apartment complex, while the Chrysler bankruptcy of 2009 caused the Darner dealership to lose its Chrysler affiliation. Many local police officers worked in the film in several capacities, including the cowboy shotgun role. Kurt Russell produced some commercials for Darner's, inviting customers to come in and shop while the film was still being shot. In a scene where Rudy and Jeff are buying the Edsel in the back lot and are confronted by Roy and Sam over Luke's whereabouts. I already mentioned that. Never mind. Sorry. Let's see. So we are at 1 hour and 35 minutes and 30 seconds. Yeah. Now you can see clearly in the truck that they're not in the back of the truck. Kurt Russell and Deborah Harmon for that one shot where they're going over the going over that. That wasn't them. It's just shocking that it's actually kind of surprising that there were a lot of dismissive reviews back in 1980. The Washington Post said it was a mean-spirited farce. Director co-writer Robert Zemeckis has undeniable energy and flair, but it's being misspent on pretexts and situations that seem inexcusably gratuitous and snide. Staff reviewer for Variety wrote that what might have looked like a great idea on paper has been tackled by filmmakers who haven't expanded it much beyond one joke inherent in the premise. They too praised Zemeckis' direction as, quote, undeniably vigor, if insufficient control and discipline. Roger Ebert gave the film only 2 stars out of 4, said that it was filled with too many ideas, relationships, and situations, but plot overkill. Among the positive reviews, Dave Kerr of the Chicago Reader found it to be a fierce, cathartically funny celebration of the low, the cheap, the venal. In short, America. Vincent Canby of New York Times wrote, a quote, a movie that has more laughs in it than any film of the summer except Airplane. It wipes out just about every other recent comedy aimed, I assume, at an otherwise television-hooked public. Pauline Kael of The New Yorker described Used Cars as, quote, a classic screwball fantasy, a neglected modern comedy that's like a more restless and visually high-spirited version of the W.C. Fields pictures. Mm-hmm. And Leonard Maltin actually said many years later, I loved Used Cars, and I'll never understand really why it didn't become more. Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. And you would think with Kurt Russell, you know, and all the John Carpenter movies he's made being cult films now, I would have expected that Used Cars would have had just as big of a following, but it doesn't necessarily. But that commentary is still the funniest one I've ever heard. And I loved all the commentaries that he did with John Carpenter. Don't get me wrong. But this commentary with Zemeckis, Gale, and Russell is still the funniest to me. Maybe my second favorite would be the Adam West, Burt Ward commentary for Batman from 1966. They're actually going to jump on the truck and stop these guys. Yeah. Right. Let's see real quick. Just some leftover trivia bits here I haven't revealed yet. Let's see. Yeah, Steven Spielberg was a supporter of Jimmy Carter, and he didn't like the lines about how, well, you know, about fucking with the president, and well, he fucks with us, doesn't he? Zemeckis and Gale refused to remove the line because they were where they came from. Gale was from Missouri and Zemeckis is from Chicago, and they think that politicians are in those areas and pretty much everywhere else very, very corrupt. Yeah, it's about corrupt people going in politics after being used car salesmen and spending, you know, their career lying to people. Heavy duty, brother. Yeah. Oh, yes. After the commercial where Jeff shoots up the cars on Roy L. Fuchs's lot, he is interviewed by the FBI. In the scene, he blames the attack on Iranian students. At the time of the movie's release, the Iran hostage situation was still going on. And according to Bob Gale, an alternate version of the scene was shot in which Jeff blames the Hare Krishners. But the Iran situation was not resolved before the movie release, so it stayed in and everything. And Jeff's false accusation was still relevant when the movie came out. Robert Zemeckis was walking across the set when he spotted 2 bikers hanging out with 2 nuns. He immediately summoned the camera crew, and they shot a scene with the bikers walking up and talking and taking hot dogs away from the nuns, and the nuns retaliating by grabbing their beers and slamming them down. Normally, production assistants pour out the beer and replace it with water, but the nuns downed actual beer and promptly spat it out. Uptight Columbia executives nixed the scene because of one of them was a devout Catholic. The T-Bird's white convertible and the Scorpion's black Mercury with flames from Greece are two of the cars that Rudy Russo palms off on the driver's education teacher. Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, yeah. John Candy was originally cast in the movie playing the Joe Flaherty role, but was ultimately dropped out because his agent erroneously double booked him while he was filming 1941. And the New York Times, of all newspapers, called Used Cars the most underrated comedy of all time. That's what the New York Times said, the most underrated comedy of all time. It's certainly a hell of a candidate. I think it's definitely a hell of a candidate. A mile of cars, and they finally made it. Yes. We made it, didn't we? Yeah, we're here, aren't we? This motherfucker's all right. I love it. Oh no, the poor driver's ed teacher after all he went through. Now, we're not done yet. We're almost done, but we're not quite there yet. Yeah. So, what we're about to see when Gerrit Graham is on the highway, as you can see, his character hasn't arrived yet with the red car with gray primer. Well, those itty bitty beady eyes of yours, that looks like a mile of cars to me. Oh, just make sure. Let's measure them. Let's measure them. Now, this is real. Okay, now Terry Leonard, the stunt driver, very nearly kills Gerrit Graham right there. Gerrit Graham had no idea that he was about to be run over by Terry Leonard in that car. Because as you can see, he had his back to him, and when he turned around, the car had already passed him, very, very barely. The entire crew was paralyzed when they saw that. Robert Zemeckis on the commentary says he won't even watch that scene. He can't watch it. He has to look away because of how very, very close Gerrit Graham was to being killed in that. It's amazing. Just thank God Toby wasn't near the car either. I'm just thankful for that. And Zemeckis did double down on the commentary and said, no. We had vets there. We had everybody there. The dog was perfectly fine. He never got hurt. Thank goodness. There's red paint, which means it's a red car. And like I said, as Chucky fans know, in Child's Play 2, he was doomed because he was driving a red car. Absolutely. East Side. Red cars don't mean shit. So Terry Leonard, who also kicked in the television set and nearly killed Gerrit Graham during the making of this, also wanted to do the bit where the car goes over the train. And the filmmakers wouldn't let him. They just straight out would not let him. They categorically refused, saying that there was no reason whatsoever to have a live human being in the car as it's going over the train. So ultimately, they used a dummy. Bob Gale said in an interview that this movie failed to garner an audience because of the title, and that perhaps Rudy Russo's campaign slogan, "Trust Me," may have worked as a better one. Oh, yeah, there are two scenes which feature pinball machines. The first in the bowling date scene, and the other in the football bar. 1971 Table Solids and Stripes, and the right is the 1959 Bowie Machine County Fair. During the climax of the film, Judge Harrison is being driven to the car lot to measure whether they have a literal mile of cars. While the rest of the cast are locked in a life and death struggle to get to the car lot on time, the judge is aboard being chauffeured there and shouts at his bailiff, Billingham, let's move this chariot. I still may be able to get in 8 holes. Customarily, golf is played in blocks of 9 holes. You play 9 holes of golf, the full 18 holes, or if you're especially energetic and you have the whole day, you can play 36 holes. The dog. So yeah, that's actually a dummy. But there was no, and I do agree. I mean, there's no reason for a live human being to be in that car when it goes over the train. Now, the Winnebago here is funny because apparently they made fun of Gerrit Graham during the commentary because apparently he had this thing about hanging out in his Winnebago. And they even had a tangent where they talked about how he wanted to buy one Winnebago and couldn't get it. But he kept on saying, yeah, I'll be in my Winnebago bagoizing. Use your imagination. And here he is, finally. Finally, Gerrit, you finally showed up. And that's it, a mile of cars. And when you thought they were 2 inches short, the license plate wins it. Yeah. 5,280 feet, a mile of cars. Case dismissed. As Bob Gale said, this is about bad people at war with worse people. And you just have to get behind Kurt Russell and Deborah Harmon and Gerrit Graham and Toby and Frank McRae and just go along with it as for the black comedy that it is. And here again, like I said, I think it deserves a lot more credit from I think it needs to be seen more. I mean, that's the thing is that if you're a Back to the Future fan, definitely check this out. And also, I Want to Hold Your Hand. And, Robert Zemeckis, his new film, which is coming out in just a few months, he's being reunited with Tom Hanks and Robin Wright from Forrest Gump, which, of course, won him Best Picture and Best Director 30 years ago. So, and I don't know how they're going to do it necessarily, but the name of the movie is called Here. He co-wrote the screenplay with Eric Roth, and it's based on a graphic novel. And the story covers the events of a single spot of land and its inhabitants, spanning from the past to well into the future. Where apparently, they a very according to the graphic novel, you see this room over a period of time. So I don't know how they're going to pull this off, really. But, that comes out November 1st, 2024. Robert Zemeckis is now 72. hopefully he still has a few more films, although he really needs a hit. He hasn't really had a critical hit since since The Walk, which came out in 2015. I didn't see his Witches remake, and I know he did. Did he do Pinocchio? I think he did one of the Disney live action movies and everything. But yeah, I was right. He directed Pinocchio for Disney, and then but he hasn't had like a big hit since Flight or The Walk. So, but that is Used Cars. I think, here again, it's a great American comedy. It's a treasured satire from Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. And like I said, if you still haven't seen it, highly, highly recommend it. And Amazon decided to go ahead and stop the movie early, so I'm not going to talk through the end credits. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this commentary on Used Cars. I will be back soon for another commentary, which will either be Doc Hollywood or the 74 version of Gone in 60 Seconds. Although stand by, because around Halloween, I will do a commentary for Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise, starring Gerrit Graham and Paul Williams. So thank you for joining me for this commentary, and happy 100th birthday to Jimmy Carter. Thank you very much for joining me.